My daughter laughed when I lost everything as if my struggles were a joke. But I refused to let her mockery define me. I was determined to rise from the ashes of despair and reclaim my life, proving that I was more than her punchline. While she thought I was finished, I was secretly plotting my comeback, a comeback that would leave her wondering how she could have ever doubted me. This is the story of how I transformed my life from being laughed at to owning a mansion, and how now she wants it for her husband. Before I dive into this journey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It means the world to know I'm not alone in this. And if you resonate with my story, consider subscribing. Your support fuels my strength to share my truth. Now let's get into it. The dim glow of the street lamp cast long shadows across the cracked pavement outside my small apartment. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cold metal and worn fabric, remnants of a life lived quietly, far from luxuries or grand dreams. I sat by the window, watching the leaves swirl in the chilly autumn wind, their brittle edges breaking free and tumbling down like forgotten promises. The room was modest, cluttered with the little I owned, each piece carrying the weight of years and memories I barely dared to touch. It was on evenings like these, when the world outside seemed as fragile as the thin glass separating me from it, that I felt the sharpest pangs of doubt. The kind that creeps quietly, uninvited, settling deep in your chest and whispering that perhaps you were meant for less. I glanced at the rickety table where my daughter's toys lay scattered, plastic soldiers, a frayed doll missing an eye. Her laughter echoed in my mind, sharp and unyielding, slicing through the silence of this small room. She had laughed at me once, not long ago, when I admitted how hard it was to keep the lights on and put food on the table. It was a cold night, much like this one, when I had told her that work was scarce and money even scarcer. Instead of comfort, I received mockery, an edge to her voice that cut deeper than any blade. "You don't even know how to make ends meet," she said, her words dripping with disdain. "It's embarrassing, Mom. Maybe if you tried harder, we wouldn't be stuck here." Her laughter bounced off the peeling walls, mocking and sharp, as if my struggle was some kind of joke. I had worked since dawn, washing dishes at the diner, scrubbing floors in other people's homes, trying to piece together enough to keep us afloat. But her words made me feel invisible, like I was failing not just as a provider, but as a mother. I wanted to wrap my arms around her, to tell her that I was doing the best I could, but the words caught in my throat, tangled in the fear that maybe she was right. The apartment was small, barely enough space for the two of us, but it was all I could afford. The peeling wallpaper and the stubborn stains on the carpet were constant reminders of how far we had fallen. Yet, beneath the weight of those harsh words and the cold reality, there was a flicker, a stubborn spark that refused to be snuffed out. It whispered that this wasn't the end, that beneath the cracked surfaces, something stronger was waiting to break free. I remember the nights I lay awake, listening to the hum of the city beyond the thin walls, wondering if I was enough. Enough to give her a life beyond these cramped quarters, enough to silence the laughter that stung so deeply. I thought of the dreams I once held close, now faded but not forgotten. Dreams of stability, of a home filled with warmth and laughter, not with echoes of disappointment. Her laughter haunted me, but it also fueled a quiet determination. I refused to let those words define me. I had spent too many years watching others pass me by, their lives unfolding in bright colors while mine remained muted. I wanted more, not just for myself, but for her. The very memory of that night, the sting of her mockery, became a silent promise etched into my heart. In the dim light, I reached for a worn notebook where I had scribbled plans and ideas whenever hope seemed within reach. The pages were dog-eared and stained, but inside them lay the seeds of change. I had no grand education, no connections to lean on, but I had grit and a fierce will to protect my daughter from the harshness of the world. I traced my fingers over the words I had written, each one a step toward a future I was determined to claim. There were no easy answers, no shortcuts out of poverty's grip, but I had learned to find strength in the small victories. Each dollar saved, every job completed, every night spent awake planning what could be. The laughter that once echoed as mockery now served as a reminder of the path I had to carve, no matter how rough or lonely it might be. Outside, the wind carried the sounds of the city. Distant sirens, muffled conversations, the rustle of leaves. Inside, the room remained still, a quiet space where resilience took root. I wrapped a threadbare blanket tighter around my shoulders, feeling the weight of the cold but also the fire that simmered beneath it. I thought of the mornings when I would rise before dawn, the ache in my bones a constant companion, and the long hours spent cleaning homes that were not mine. Each sweep of the broom, each polished surface, was a step away from the life I had known and toward the one I dreamed of building. I had watched others pass by, their successes seeming so effortless, but I knew better. I knew that beneath every triumph was a story of struggle, of persistence against odds that refused to break you. Her laughter, harsh and unforgiving, had been a wound, but it had also been a call to arms. I was not just fighting for survival, I was fighting to rewrite the story of our lives. There would be no magic, no sudden windfalls, only the slow, steady climb toward something better. And I was ready to begin. The night deepened, wrapping the city in shadows, but inside my apartment, a small light flickered. It was the light of hope, fragile but fierce, refusing to be extinguished. I closed my eyes and made a silent vow. No matter how many times I stumbled, no matter how many harsh words were thrown my way, I would rise. For her, for me, for the life waiting just beyond the cold walls of this humble home. In that quiet moment, with the world asleep around me, I felt the first stirrings of a journey that would test every ounce of my strength. The road ahead was uncertain, but the seed was planted, and from it something new would grow, something unbreakable. The sting of her laughter lingered long after the words had faded into the cold night air. I could still hear it echoing in the empty rooms, sharp and unrelenting, like a sudden gust tearing through fragile glass. It wasn't just the sound, it was the weight behind it, a weight that pressed down on my chest and made it hard to breathe. I had known hardship before, but her mockery cut deeper, slicing through the thin veil of hope I had carefully wrapped around my heart. I remember that night vividly, the way her eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite name. Contempt, maybe, or frustration that I could never fully understand. She stood there in the cramped kitchen, arms crossed as I confessed my failures, my fears. The words spilled out between us like a chasm growing wider by the second. "You don't even know how to make ends meet," she said, the cruel edge in her voice making the small kitchen feel colder than the autumn wind outside. "It's embarrassing, Mom. Maybe if you tried harder, we wouldn't be stuck here." I wanted to argue, to explain that I worked from dawn until my bones ached, that every penny was stretched thin like a fraying thread. But the truth was tangled and messy, and her laughter drowned out my voice. I felt small, diminished, as if all my efforts had been invisible to her eyes. That moment wasn't just a crack in our relationship, it was a chasm threatening to swallow the fragile connection we had left. In the days that followed, I replayed her words over and over, each time feeling the sting sharpen. It was as if her laughter had opened a wound that refused to heal, exposing every fear and failure I had tried to bury beneath layers of exhaustion and resolve. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow let her down, that my struggles were not just mine but hers too, and that my inability to provide had become a source of shame. But beneath the hurt, a different feeling began to take root, a spark of defiance, burning quietly but steadily. Her mockery, meant to belittle, had lit a fire inside me. I realized that if I let her words define me, if I accepted that I was powerless and unworthy, then I truly would be lost. Instead, I chose to use that pain as fuel, a harsh reminder that change was not just necessary but urgent. I started waking earlier, pushing myself harder, determined to prove to her, and more importantly, to myself, that I was capable of more. Each day became a battle against doubt and fatigue, but I clung to the belief that my efforts would one day be seen, that my worth was not measured by the sneer of a daughter's laughter. I found strength in the smallest victories, a day without missing a shift, a dollar saved, a kind word from a neighbor who noticed my perseverance. Still, the memory of that night haunted me, a persistent shadow lurking in the corners of my mind. I wondered what had caused such bitterness in her voice. Was it frustration born from her own struggles? Was it a reflection of the hardships I had shielded her from but could never fully erase? These questions twisted inside me, tangled with guilt and love in a way that made it hard to separate pain from hope. I began to understand that our relationship was complicated, woven with threads of disappointment, love, and unmet expectations. Her laughter was not just mockery, it was a cry from a place I couldn't reach, a reflection of the hardships we both endured in different ways. And yet, I refused to let it break me. I needed to rise above the sting, to build a foundation strong enough to hold us both. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world outside seemed indifferent, I allowed myself to dream. Not of instant miracles or easy fixes, but of steady progress, of a life where her laughter would be filled with joy, not scorn. I imagined a day when she would see me not as a failure, but as a woman who had fought tooth and nail against the odds. And I promised myself that I would keep moving forward, no matter how slow or painful the journey. The days were long and often lonely. I counted every dollar, clipped every coupon, and took every odd job I could find. Sometimes exhaustion threatened to swallow me whole, but I held on to that spark, feeding it with every small success. I learned to be patient with myself, to recognize that healing and change were not immediate but gradual. The laughter that once wounded me became a distant echo, replaced by a quiet determination that grew louder with each passing day. I also began to seek out moments of solace in unexpected places: a friendly nod from the cashier at the grocery store, a warm smile from a coworker, the soft rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze. These small reminders that kindness existed even in hard times helped me keep going. I started to write again, filling the pages of my notebook with plans, hopes, and the occasional venting of frustration. The act of putting pen to paper became a lifeline, a way to untangle the knots of pain and hope within me. Sometimes late at night, I would sit by the window and watch the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about the life I wanted to build, a life where laughter was an expression of happiness, not hurt. I imagined a home filled with warmth and love where my daughter and I could find peace and belonging. These visions became my compass, guiding me through the darkest moments. Through it all, I learned that strength was not the absence of pain but the courage to keep moving forward despite it. My daughter's laughter, once a source of shame and sorrow, became a catalyst for change. It reminded me that I was not powerless, that my story was still being written, and that the pages ahead held the promise of something better. I did not have all the answers, nor did I pretend that the road ahead would be easy. But I had a renewed sense of purpose, a determination that no mockery or setback could extinguish. I was learning to stand tall in the face of doubt, to believe in my own worth even when others could not see it. And in that belief, I found the strength to carry on, to keep fighting for the life my daughter and I deserved. The laughter that had once wounded me was no longer a chain but a spark. It ignited within me a fire that would not be quenched, a resolve to rise above the pain and build something lasting. And so with every sunrise I stepped forward, one shaky, hopeful step at a time, into the uncertain but promising future that awaited. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow across the worn kitchen table where I sat nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. The past months had been a blur of exhaustion and small victories, but that day felt different, charged with an unfamiliar energy that stirred something deep inside me. It was the kind of morning when the air seemed thick with possibility, even if the world outside was as unforgiving as ever. I was on my way to the diner where I worked when I first met her, Mrs. Delaney, a sharp-eyed woman with a keen smile and an air of quiet authority. She came in every morning, ordering the same black coffee and a slice of pie, always sitting alone at the corner table. At first, I barely noticed her among the steady stream of customers, but one day she struck up a conversation, asking about my life with a genuine curiosity that caught me off guard. "I see you work hard," she said, her voice steady but kind. "Have you ever thought about investing in real estate? It's not just for the wealthy, you know. Sometimes all it takes is the right opportunity and a little guidance." Her words lingered in my mind long after she left. Real estate? It sounded like a world far beyond my reach, something reserved for people with money and connections. But there was something in her tone, a spark of belief, that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was a path I hadn't seen before. Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Delaney and I spoke more often. She told me stories of her early days, how she had started small, managing properties and learning the ropes through trial and error. She offered to introduce me to a savvy investor she knew, someone who believed in giving others a chance to learn the business from the ground up. I was hesitant at first, unsure if I was ready to step into a new world that seemed so far removed from my day-to-day struggles. But the thought of breaking free from the cycle of endless work with little to show for it was too tempting to ignore. I agreed to meet this investor, a man named Mr. Harris, who had a reputation for spotting potential where others saw none. Our first meeting was held in a cramped office filled with stacks of papers and the faint smell of coffee. Mr. Harris was a tall man with sharp eyes and an easy smile. He listened as I shared my story, the long hours, the sacrifices, the dreams that still flickered beneath the surface. Instead of dismissing me, he nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the grit and determination that had carried me this far. "Property management isn't glamorous," he said, "but it's a foothold. If you're willing to learn and put in the work, it can open doors you never thought possible." He offered me a small role assisting with his properties, handling tenant calls, coordinating repairs, and keeping records. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope that wasn't just a fragile dream but a tangible step forward. The work was challenging. I had to learn quickly, juggling this new responsibility alongside my existing jobs and caring for my daughter. There were days when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, when the weight of unfamiliar terms and endless details made me question if I was cut out for this world. But I kept going, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. With each task, I began to see the pieces of a larger puzzle: how properties could generate income, how careful management could turn a profit, how knowledge was power. I started reading books on real estate, attending free seminars, and asking endless questions, hungry to soak up every bit of information I could. Mrs. Delaney became a mentor of sorts, encouraging me when doubts crept in and celebrating the small wins. She reminded me that every expert had once been a beginner, that the path to success was paved with persistence and learning from mistakes. Her belief in me was a steady flame, warming the cold edges of uncertainty. As the months passed, I found myself growing not just in knowledge but in confidence. I began to think beyond survival, imagining a future where financial independence was within reach. The idea of owning a home, not just a place to live but an asset that could be passed down, became a real possibility. There were setbacks, of course. Tenants who didn't pay on time, repairs that drained resources, moments when I felt overwhelmed by the complexities of contracts and legalities. But each challenge was a lesson, a chance to build resilience and sharpen my skills. I learned to ask for help when I needed it, to trust my instincts, and to keep my eyes on the bigger picture. One evening, after a long day managing a particularly difficult situation, I sat on the steps outside the office, the cool air wrapping around me like a balm. I thought about how far I had come, from the cramped apartment where my daughter's laughter once felt like a judgment to this place where I was carving out a new life. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time it felt navigable. That night, I called my daughter and told her about the new job, about the people I was meeting and the skills I was learning. Her voice was quieter than usual, but there was a flicker of interest, maybe even pride. I hoped that one day she would see me not just as a struggling mother but as a woman who fought to rise above hardship and create something lasting. The journey was just beginning, but the spark of opportunity had been lit. With every tenant call I answered, every repair I coordinated, I was building more than just a career. I was building a foundation. A foundation that would one day support more than just a roof over our heads, but a future filled with promise and dignity. As I closed my eyes that night, the city lights twinkling outside my window, I felt a quiet resolve settle in my bones. This was no longer just about survival, it was about transformation. And I was ready to embrace the challenge, step by step, with grit and hope guiding the way. The days blurred together in a whirlwind of exhaustion and relentless effort. Dawn often found me already awake, the soft creak of the apartment settling my only companion as I rose to prepare for the long hours ahead. Balancing multiple jobs, caring for my daughter, and navigating the intricate world of property management was a feat I hadn't anticipated, but one I faced with a stubborn resolve that refused to waver. Each morning, I would leave the cramped apartment, the familiar chill in the air biting at my skin as I stepped onto the worn pavement. The city was waking up too, cars humming, voices drifting from open windows, the distant clang of morning routines beginning elsewhere. I carried with me a notebook filled with scribbled reminders and goals, a roadmap of sorts that kept me tethered to the future I was determined to build. Work was grueling. At the diner, the clatter of dishes and murmurs of early patrons filled the air as I moved from table to table, my muscles aching but my mind alert. Later, I shifted gears to property management, fielding tenant complaints, scheduling repairs, and poring over contracts that seemed written in a language I was only beginning to understand. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, yet I found a strange comfort in the rhythm of tasks accomplished and problem solved. There were moments when the fatigue was nearly unbearable, when my body ached and my spirit wavered, but in those times I reminded myself of the path I had chosen. Each sacrifice, each sleepless night, was a brick laid in the foundation of a life that could be different. I thought of my daughter, her laughter no longer a source of pain but a beacon guiding me forward. I wanted her to see strength where once there was struggle, to know that our story was not defined by hardship alone. Financially, the journey was painstaking. Every extra dollar earned was carefully counted, stretched to cover rent, groceries, and the occasional treat that brightened a long day. I kept meticulous records, tracking expenses and savings with a precision born of necessity. The idea of investing seemed distant, yet I held on to the lessons learned from Mrs. Delaney and Mr. Harris, piecing together knowledge that would one day translate into opportunity. Education became a quiet refuge amid the chaos. I devoured books on real estate and finance, attended community workshops when I could, and sought advice from those who had walked the path before me. The more I learned, the clearer the possibilities became, a future where I could not only provide but also protect, where I could build wealth in security rather than just scrape by. Yet the road was never smooth. Tenants missed payments, repairs came with unexpected costs, and bureaucracy often tangled progress in red tape. There were days when frustration threatened to overwhelm me, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But with each setback, I learned resilience. I adapted, problem-solved, and sometimes simply endured, knowing that perseverance was a quiet but powerful form of victory. At home, the balance was delicate. I juggled the demands of work with the needs of a growing child, striving to create moments of normalcy amid the uncertainty. Bedtime stories, shared meals, and small celebrations became lifelines, reminders that love and hope could coexist with struggle. I wanted my daughter to know that despite the hardships, we were building something lasting, something that would endure beyond the walls of our modest apartment. I often reflected on the woman I was becoming, hardened yet hopeful, weary yet unwavering. The journey had shaped me in ways I hadn't expected, teaching lessons of humility, strength, and the quiet power of persistence. I was no longer just surviving. I was growing, learning to navigate a world that had once seemed impenetrable. One evening, after a particularly long day filled with tenant disputes and unexpected repairs, I sat on the steps outside the office, the cool air wrapping around me like a fragile comfort. I pulled out my notebook, fingers tracing the words and calculations that marked the progress made and the challenges ahead. Despite the exhaustion, a sense of accomplishment settled over me, a reminder that every effort was a step forward. I thought of the years behind me, the nights filled with doubt, the laughter that once stung, and recognized how far I had come. The seed of determination planted in those quiet moments had taken root, growing into a resilient spirit that refused to be broken. I was no longer defined by the struggles of the past but by the promise of the future I was building. With renewed resolve, I rose from the steps and walked back inside, ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The path was still uncertain, the road ahead long and winding, but I carried with me the strength forged through hardship and the knowledge that endurance was its own kind of triumph. As I tucked my daughter into bed that night, her eyes heavy with sleep but filled with trust, I whispered a silent promise, to keep fighting, to keep building, and to never let go of the hope that had brought us this far. The journey was far from over, but with every day, every sacrifice, and every lesson learned, I was moving closer to the life we both deserved. The day my daughter returned, I was in the garden, pruning the rose bushes that had finally begun to bloom after years of neglect. The scent of earth and petals filled the air, a quiet testament to the hard work and care I had poured into this place. The house stood behind me, modest but sturdy, a symbol of the journey I had fought so hard to make real. The sunlight warmed my skin, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel a fragile sense of peace. Then the knock came at the door, sharp and insistent, pulling me back to the present. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked inside, heart tightening as I saw her standing there. It was my daughter, older now, with a look I barely recognized. The years had changed her, but the familiar edge in her eyes remained, a mixture of entitlement and expectation that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her gaze sweeping over the living room with a casual air, as if she were already claiming the space. Behind her, her husband followed, nodding politely but with an unmistakable confidence that made the air feel heavier. They had come unannounced, their presence a stark contrast to the quiet life I had built here. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "This house, you've done well to get it, Mom. But it belongs to the family now. To me and my husband. We should be making plans for it, deciding what's best." I stood still, the words sinking in like cold water. I had expected many things, questions, maybe even skepticism, but not this boldness, this assumption that years of struggle and sacrifice meant nothing. The house was more than just walls and a roof, it was the embodiment of every hardship I had endured, every sleepless night, every penny saved. And here she was, speaking as if it were a mere possession to be handed over. Her husband chimed in, a smooth voice layered with patronizing concern. "We're just looking out for you, really. It's time you thought about moving into a place that's easier to manage. A facility, maybe? Somewhere you can get the care you need without the stress." Their words hit me like a blow. The suggestion that I was incapable, that I should be moved aside, was a sharp reminder of the very struggles I had fought to overcome. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to remind them of the strength it had taken to build this life. But I stayed silent, watching as they spoke over me, their confidence filling the room like an unwelcome storm. They began discussing plans for my care and the house's future, as if I were a bystander in my own life. Their voices mingled with the faint ticking of the clock, each word a reminder that I was being pushed to the margins. The love I had hoped for was tangled with expectations and assumptions that left me feeling small and invisible. Later that evening, after they had left as abruptly as they had come, the house felt colder, emptier. The garden outside seemed less vibrant, the roses wilting under the weight of my thoughts. I walked through the rooms, touching surfaces that bore the marks of my labor, the freshly painted walls, the sturdy kitchen counters, the windows that let in the morning light. This was my sanctuary, earned through years of toil and resilience. Their visit had shaken me, but beneath the surface, a quiet resolve began to grow. I realized that love was complicated, tangled with hurt and disappointment, but I was not powerless. The house was mine, not just on paper, but in every fiber of my being. It was a symbol of survival, strength, and hope that no one could claim without my consent. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, from the struggles in that cold apartment to the small victories that had built this home. I thought of the nights spent studying contracts, the early mornings at the diner, and the endless hours managing properties. Each step had been a testament to my determination, and I was not about to let it be diminished. I began to set boundaries, quietly but firmly, preparing myself for the conversations that would inevitably come. I reached out to friends and advisors, gathering knowledge and support to protect what I had built. It was not just about the house, it was about reclaiming my voice and asserting my right to live life on my own terms. When my daughter called again, her tone softer but no less insistent, I was ready. I spoke calmly, explaining that the house was a reflection of my hard work and that any decisions about its future would be made with respect for my wishes. The conversation was tense, filled with unspoken emotions and years of unresolved pain, but I held my ground. Their persistence was daunting, but I was no longer the woman who had silently endured. I found strength in the lessons learned along the way, the value of patience, the power of resilience, and the importance of self-respect. I knew that love could be complicated, but it should never come at the cost of dignity. As I tended the garden each morning, watching the roses bloom anew, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This house was more than just a building, it was a testament to a lifetime of struggle and triumph. And I was determined to protect it, not just for myself but for the future I was still building. The days ahead would bring challenges, no doubt, but I was ready to face them. With every breath, every word spoken, and every boundary set, I reclaimed a piece of myself that had long been overshadowed. The house stood firm behind me, a silent witness to the strength that had carried me through, and the unyielding resolve that would see me through whatever came next. The tension between us hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. After their visit, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, betrayal, love, anger, and an ache deep within my chest that I struggled to name. My daughter was family, but the way she had stormed into my life, claiming what I had built as if it were hers by right, left me reeling. I spent long nights wrestling with the turmoil inside me. How could I reconcile the love I had for her with the bitterness her words had sown? She had mocked my struggles once, and now years later, she demanded the fruits of those struggles without gratitude or respect. The house, the garden, the life I had painstakingly created, were they to be handed over as if they were mere objects, meaningless without her approval? One afternoon, as the sun cast warm light across the living room, I finally gathered the courage to confront her. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her posture casual, her eyes guarded. The silence stretched between us before I found my voice. This house, I began slowly, choosing my words with care, is not just a building. It's every early morning, every late night, every sacrifice I made when you thought I wasn't listening. My hands trembled slightly as I spoke, but my gaze remained steady. It's my hard work, my resilience. It's a symbol of survival, not a gift to be claimed without respect. She looked away for a moment, eyes flickering with a mixture of guilt and frustration. Mom, I'm not trying to take it from you. I want us to be together as a family, to share what you've built. It's not about taking, but about belonging. Her words, though softer, felt like a tangled web of misunderstanding. I wanted to believe her, to reach across the divide and bridge the gap that had grown between us. But I also knew that love without boundaries could become suffocating, that respect was the foundation of any relationship worth having. I want that too, I said quietly. But belonging isn't about ownership. It's about trust and respect. I need you to understand that this house is my life's work, and I have the right to decide what happens here. The conversation stretched on, fraught with unspoken pain and years of unmet expectations. We circled around the truth, both yearning for connection yet caught in the shadows of past wounds. At times it felt as though we were speaking different languages, her words laced with entitlement, mine with the fierce protection of hard-earned independence. In the days that followed, I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of me longed to rebuild the closeness we had lost, to find a way back to the laughter and warmth that had once filled our home. but another part recognized the necessity of standing firm, of setting boundaries that protected not just my assets but my dignity. I sought counsel from trusted friends and mentors, sharing pieces of my story and listening to their wisdom. They reminded me that love was complex and that self-respect was not selfish but essential. They encouraged me to be clear in my intentions and unwavering in my resolve. With their support, I began to communicate more openly with my daughter, expressing not just my boundaries but my hopes for healing. I told her that I wanted to rebuild our relationship, but on terms that honored both of us. It was a delicate balance, offering space for reconciliation while guarding against further hurt. There were moments of breakthrough, small glimmers when her defenses softened, and we shared memories or laughter that reminded us of the bond beneath the pain. But there were also setbacks, times when old wounds reopened and the cycle of hurt threatened to consume us. Through it all, I learned to listen, not just to her words but to the feelings beneath them. I began to see that her demands stemmed from her own fears and insecurities, just as my resistance was rooted in the fear of losing myself. Understanding this allowed me to approach our conflicts with compassion, even when I had to be firm. I also began to nurture myself in ways I had neglected for years. I spent time in the garden, tending to the roses that bloomed resiliently despite the season's harshness. I took quiet walks in the early morning, breathing in the crisp air and reminding myself of my strength. These moments of solitude became anchors, grounding me amid the emotional storm. One afternoon, as I pruned the rose bushes, I reflected on how much I had grown. The journey from that small apartment, filled with doubt and mockery, to this place of strength and clarity was marked by pain but also by profound resilience. I realized that setting boundaries was not about building walls but about creating space for healthy relationships to flourish. When my daughter and I spoke again, the conversation was tentative but more honest. I told her that I loved her and wanted us to find a way forward, but that respect for my independence was non-negotiable. She listened, her voice quieter, and for the first time, I sensed a willingness to understand rather than to claim. The path ahead was still uncertain and I knew there would be challenges. But I felt a growing confidence that I could navigate this complex terrain with grace. I was learning that love and boundaries were not opposing forces but partners in the delicate dance of healing. At night, as I lay in bed, I often thought about the future. The kind of relationship I wanted with my daughter, the legacy I wished to leave, and the home that stood as a testament to my journey. I understood now that true strength was not just in enduring hardship, but in embracing vulnerability and setting limits that honored both myself and those I loved. The house, the garden, the life I had built. They were intertwined with my identity, but they did not define the fullness of who I was becoming. I was a woman shaped by struggle and love, by loss and hope, learning each day how to balance the two with courage and compassion. And so with each passing day I continued to walk forward, facing the complexities of family and self with a heart that was both guarded and open, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The days that followed my confrontation with my daughter were heavy with unspoken tensions. Despite my efforts to set clear boundaries, her persistence did not wane. Instead, it took on a new, more insidious form. Emotional manipulation wrapped in false concern, veiled threats masked as family obligations. I found myself navigating a minefield, where every word could be twisted, every silence interpreted as weakness. One afternoon she called unexpectedly. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, but beneath it lurked a calculated edge that sent a chill down my spine. "Mom, we're worried about you," she said. "It's hard to watch you struggle alone. Maybe it's time to think about what's best for everyone. We just want to help." I listened carefully, my heart tightening. "Help is welcome when it respects my choices," I replied steadily. "But I'm capable of making decisions about my life and my home." Her sigh was long and heavy. "I know you think that, but sometimes people don't see what's best for themselves. You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe a professional evaluation would be a good idea, just to be sure." The suggestion hung in the air like a noose. I recognized it for what it was, a subtle attempt to question my mental capacity, to chip away at my independence. The idea that my ability to manage my own affairs could be doubted by my own daughter was a bitter pill to swallow. But I refused to let it break me. Determined not to be caught unprepared, I began seeking advice. I reached out to a trusted attorney who specialized in elder care and asset protection. She listened patiently as I shared the situation, her tone both reassuring and pragmatic. "You have every right to protect your assets and your autonomy," she said. "We can take steps to ensure your wishes are respected. including drafting a clear will, establishing powers of attorney, and, if necessary, preparing medical evaluations to affirm your capacity. The process was daunting, but I felt a renewed sense of control. I scheduled a comprehensive medical evaluation with a respected physician who could attest to my mental fitness. Sitting in the sterile office, answering questions and completing tests, I felt a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. This was not just about proving a point. It was about reclaiming my voice, my life. Meanwhile, my daughter's calls grew more frequent, her tone shifting between concern and insistence. She spoke of family gatherings, of how everyone was looking out for me, of plans that seemed to exclude my input. It was as if she was trying to rewrite the narrative, painting me as fragile and incapable. One afternoon, she showed up at my door unannounced, carrying a stack of papers and a brochure for a senior living facility. Her smile was practiced, but her eyes betrayed impatience. "I thought we could talk about some options," she said, stepping inside before I could respond. I stood firm, the weight of months of struggle behind me. "I appreciate your concern, but decisions about my life won't be made without me," I said clearly. "This is my home and I intend to stay here as long as I'm able." Her expression flickered frustration, maybe even anger, but she said nothing more that day. As she left, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer facing it alone. With the help of my attorney, I began organizing my affairs. I drafted a will that clearly stated my intentions for the house and my assets. I designated trusted friends as executors and guardians of my wishes. I gathered documentation and medical reports to create a solid foundation against any attempts to undermine my autonomy. Friends and neighbors rallied around me, offering support and encouragement. Their belief in my strength became a balm to my weary spirit. I realized I was not isolated. There was a community willing to stand with me to help guard the life I had built. Throughout this ordeal, I learned to assert myself in new ways. I practiced saying no without guilt, setting firm boundaries in conversations and visits. I reminded myself daily that my worth was not defined by others' opinions or demands, but by my own sense of dignity and purpose. There were moments of doubt, of course. Times when the emotional toll felt overwhelming and I questioned whether the fight was worth it. But each time I returned to the image of my garden, the roses that bloomed resiliently despite the season's harshness. They were a reminder that strength often grows in quiet, persistent ways. One evening, after a particularly difficult phone call with my daughter, I sat at the kitchen table and played the recording I had made during one of our earlier conversations. Hearing her words now, laced with condescension and veiled threats, steeled my resolve. I knew I had to protect myself, not out of anger but out of necessity. When she next came to visit, I was prepared. I calmly presented the medical evaluation confirming my mental capacity and shared the details of my legal arrangements. Her surprise was evident, and for a moment the bravado faded. I spoke clearly, "I am capable and I will not be controlled or manipulated. This is my life." She left that day with little more than a nod. The dynamic between us shifted but unresolved. I felt a quiet victory, not because I had won a battle against her, but because I had reclaimed my power and dignity. In the weeks that followed, I continued to cultivate my independence. I tended my garden, managed my properties, and nurtured relationships that honored and respected me. The fight had been costly, but it had also been transformative. I realized that protecting oneself was not just about legal documents or medical evaluations. It was about standing firm in one's truth, refusing to be diminished, and embracing the strength that comes from knowing your worth. And so with each new day, I moved forward, guarded but hopeful, resilient and unyielding, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with the quiet confidence that comes from standing in one's own power. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow over the worn wooden table where I sat with a cup of tea, feeling a quiet strength settle into my bones. The past months had been a relentless test of will, but now, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my home and the gentle hum of life around me, I sensed a new chapter quietly unfolding. With the support of trusted friends and advisors, I had begun to reclaim not only my property but also my voice. The legal safeguards were in place: a clear will, medical evaluations, and powers of attorney, all meticulously prepared to protect my independence and ensure my wishes would be honored. But beyond the paperwork, it was the inner transformation that mattered most. I was no longer the woman who had quietly endured. I was a woman empowered, standing firmly in her truth. Friends stopped by more often now, their visits a balm to my spirit. We shared stories over steaming cups of coffee, their encouragement weaving a network of resilience around me. They reminded me that strength was not solitary but communal, that even in the darkest moments, connection could light the way. Their belief in me bolstered my own, and together we forged a path forward. When my daughter and her husband returned, their approach was noticeably different. Gone was the entitlement and condescension. Instead, they came with tentative gestures and cautious words. I met them with calm confidence, ready to communicate clearly where I stood. The house was mine, not just in title but in every effort and sacrifice that had built it. I was willing to share my life, yes, but only with respect and understanding. I appreciate your concern, I said one afternoon, but I need you to see me as I am, a capable woman who has fought hard for this life. If we are to move forward, it must be on terms that honor my independence. Their responses were measured, reflecting a dawning awareness that the dynamics had shifted. It was not an easy process. Old wounds surfaced and tensions flared. But beneath it all, there was a tentative desire to rebuild what had been strained. I found myself practicing patience, knowing that healing was neither instant nor linear. I listened as they voiced their fears and frustrations, and I shared my own hopes and boundaries. Communication became a delicate dance, sometimes graceful, sometimes awkward, but always a step toward understanding. At the same time, I continued to nurture the sanctuary I had created. The garden flourished under my care, each bloom a testament to resilience and renewal. The house echoed with the rhythms of daily life, the scent of cooking, the soft rustle of books being read, the quiet moments of reflection. This was my domain, a place where I could breathe freely and stand tall. I also began to explore new ways to give back, inspired by the journey that had brought me here. I started volunteering with local organizations that supported women facing challenges similar to my own. Sharing my story became a source of empowerment, not just for me, but for others who needed to hear that strength could be cultivated, even in the face of adversity. Through these connections, I found renewed purpose. I was no longer defined solely by the struggles I had endured but by the ways I chose to rise above them. Each day brought opportunities to learn, to grow, and to forge meaningful bonds that transcended pain and misunderstanding. There were moments of solitude, too, quiet evenings when I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars emerge against the darkening sky. In those times, I reflected on the journey from the small, cramped apartment where doubt had once threatened to consume me, to the home that now stood as a beacon of perseverance. I thought about the laughter that had once wounded me, the laughter of a daughter who had not yet understood the depths of my sacrifices. And I hoped that, in time, healing would soften those edges, allowing us to build a relationship rooted in mutual respect and love. The path was far from easy, but I had learned that boundaries were not barriers but bridges, ways to protect oneself while inviting others in on honest terms. I was discovering that empowerment was not about isolation but about connection balanced with self-respect. As the weeks turned into months, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Conversations became more open, smiles more genuine, and the walls seemed to breathe with a lighter energy. The process of rebuilding was ongoing, marked by small victories and occasional setbacks, but always moving forward. I took comfort in knowing that the strength I had cultivated was not fragile. It was forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by the grace of perseverance. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead with a heart open to growth and a spirit unbroken. In the quiet moments before sleep, I often whispered a silent thank you, to the friends who stood by me, to the resilience within me, and to the future still waiting to be written. The house was more than a shelter, it was a testament to a life reclaimed and a legacy of dignity and self-respect. And so, with each new dawn, I embraced this chapter with courage and hope, knowing that standing firm in my truth was the greatest gift I could give, to myself, to my family, and to the life I continued to build. The days grew quieter between us, the sharp edges of confrontation softening into a delicate truce. I watched my daughter from across the room one afternoon as she hesitated before speaking, her eyes searching mine for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps forgiveness. The distance that had once felt vast was beginning to shrink, replaced by tentative steps toward a fragile reconciliation. Our relationship had always been complicated, woven with strands of love and pain, expectation and disappointment. I had carried the weight of her laughter, once mocking, now more reflective in my heart like a scar that refused to fade. But beneath that scar, I sensed the possibility of healing, a chance to rebuild not on the shaky foundation of past hurts but on new ground, firm and honest. We began to talk more openly, sharing memories of days before the rift, when laughter was lighter and the future seemed less uncertain. She spoke of her struggles, the pressures she faced, and the fears that had driven her to act with such entitlement. I listened, not with judgment but with empathy, recognizing that her own pain had shaped her actions as much as mine had shaped mine. In turn, I shared my journey, the sacrifices made in silence, the nights filled with doubt, and the relentless determination to create a life beyond mere survival. I spoke of the house, not as a possession but as a symbol of resilience, a testament to what could be built from hardship. My words were cautious, careful to invite connection rather than blame. There were moments when the past threatened to resurface, when old wounds bled through the cracks of our fragile peace. Yet, each time we chose to pause and listen, to acknowledge pain without allowing it to define us. It was a slow process marked by patience and the willingness to be vulnerable. I realized that respect was the cornerstone of this rebuilding, that without it, love could become a battleground rather than a refuge. Boundaries were no longer walls to keep each other out but markers of self-worth that allowed space for growth. I saw her beginning to understand this, her gestures becoming softer, her words more measured. One afternoon, as we sat together in the garden I had nurtured through the years, she reached out and touched my hand. The simple act carried a weight of unspoken apology and hope. I squeezed her fingers gently, feeling the fragile thread of connection strengthen. We spoke then of the future, not as adversaries but as mother and daughter seeking common ground. Plans were tentatively made for visits, for shared meals, for moments of joy untainted by past grievances. It was not perfect, nor was it without fear, but it was real. I also reflected on my own journey towards self-worth and the courage it took to enforce boundaries with love rather than anger. I had learned that forgiveness was not about forgetting or excusing hurt but about releasing its hold over us. It was a gift I offered not just to her but to myself. In the quiet of my home, I found solace in small routines, the tending of my garden, the turning of pages in a favorite book, the soft glow of evening light filtering through lace curtains. These moments grounded me, reminding me of the strength that had carried me from struggle to stability. I began to envision a legacy that extended beyond bricks and mortar, a legacy of dignity, resilience, and the power of setting limits with grace. I dreamed of transforming the house into a sanctuary, a place where others who had faced hardship could find refuge and hope. It was a vision born from my own trials and tempered by the lessons of love and loss. As the seasons changed, so did the rhythm of our interactions. The laughter that once cut like a blade now held the possibility of healing, a bridge between past and present. I cherished the times when my daughter's smile was genuine, when her presence felt like a gift rather than a challenge. Yet, I remained mindful of the journey ahead, knowing that rebuilding trust was a path paved with intention and care. I continued to nurture my own well-being, surrounding myself with those who honored my boundaries and celebrated my strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the garden, I sat on the porch and breathed deeply. The air was thick with the scent of blooming roses, each petal a testament to endurance and renewal. I felt a profound sense of peace, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of hope. In that moment, I understood that a relationship, like the garden, required tending. It demanded patience, resilience, and a willingness to confront discomfort for the sake of growth. And I was ready to embrace that challenge. The path was still unfolding, uncertain and imperfect, but it was ours to walk together. With each step, I carried the lessons of the past and the promise of a future defined not by pain but by the strength found in love tempered with respect. And so, as twilight deepened and stars began to twinkle in the velvet sky, I held on to the quiet certainty that healing was possible, that the bonds we forged through struggle could become the foundation for a new beginning. The garden bloomed brighter than ever that spring, each rose a vivid splash of color against the deep green leaves I had tended through seasons of struggle and hope. As I pruned and watered, the familiar rhythm soothed my spirit, a quiet celebration of resilience that mirrored the journey I had walked. This home, once just a dream whispered in the dark, now stood as a testament to every sacrifice, every tear, and every moment I had refused to give up. At 69, I found myself in a place I never imagined, surrounded by the fruits of my labor, a sanctuary built not just of bricks but of will and endurance. The house was more than a shelter, it was a legacy, one I intended to nurture and share. I had rewritten the story, transforming pain into strength, hardship into hope. The past lingered in the corners, memories of laughter turned sharp, of battles fought in silence, but they no longer held power over me. Instead, they were reminders of the path that led here, a map of the resilience etched into my bones. I had learned that strength was not the absence of struggle but the courage to rise again and again. My daughter had changed too, slowly opening her heart to the woman I had become. Our relationship, once fractured by pain and misunderstanding, was now a fragile but growing bridge. We shared moments of warmth, tentative apologies, and the slow rebuilding of trust. She sent letters expressing regret, words that I tucked carefully away, not as wounds but as seeds of hope for future healing. In the quiet mornings, I often sat by the window, sipping coffee and watching the world awaken. The garden outside was alive with birdsong and sunlight, a living reminder that growth was possible in even the hardest soil. I thought about the women I had met through my volunteer work, their stories echoing my own struggle and triumph. It inspired me to turn my home into a sanctuary, a place where others could find safety, strength, and a new beginning. The plans were taking shape, a modest refuge for women who had faced adversity, a place where dignity and support would be offered freely. The idea filled me with a sense of purpose that warmed my heart and steadied my hands. This was the legacy I wanted to leave, a home that would shelter not just bodies but spirits. Legal arrangements safeguarded my wishes, ensuring that this sanctuary would endure beyond my years. I felt peace in knowing that my hard-earned independence would protect those who needed it most. The house was no longer just mine, it belonged to a future filled with possibility. Neighbors and friends often stopped by, their smiles genuine and their respect palpable. They saw not just the physical home but the spirit that animated it, a spirit of resilience, kindness, and unwavering determination. Their presence reminded me that I was part of a larger community, woven together by shared stories and mutual support. One afternoon, as I tended the roses, I received a letter from my grandchildren. Their words were tentative but heartfelt, expressing regret for the pain their parents had caused and a desire to reconnect. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a special box, a symbol of openness, patience, and the hope that love could heal wounds over time. Life continued its steady rhythm, the tending of the garden, the hum of daily chores, the quiet moments of reflection. Each day was a gift, a chance to nurture not only the home but the person I had become. I embraced the ebb and flow of joy and sorrow, knowing that both were parts of a rich, full life. As evening fell, I often sat on the porch, the cool air wrapping around me like a comforting shawl. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to a journey marked by hardship and triumph. In those moments, I felt a profound gratitude for the struggles that shaped me, for the strength that sustained me, and for the future I was helping to build. At 69, I understood that this was not an ending but a beginning. The story was still unfolding, written with each breath, each choice, and each act of courage. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a woman who had reclaimed her life and was ready to share its lessons with the world. And so, with a heart full of hope and hands steady with purpose, I looked toward the days ahead, ready to nurture my garden, my home, and the legacy of strength and dignity that would outlast me.